Okay, thanks. So my name's Alexandra Howard. I was born and bred in Joburg, but I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of the Free State. And yes, it's been great to be one of the L'Oreal UNESCO for Women in Science South African winners this year. But it's been a long road to this bats in agroecosystems. So during my master's at the University of Pretoria, I had some great mentors and I discovered my passion for bats. And then I also realized working in game reserves and wildlife conservation that we need to better connect ecological research and agriculture, as we all know how important agriculture is to all of us as South Africans. But there's been very little research, especially in terms of bats, looking at these systems. So because of my master's and my previous advisors, they introduced me to Professor Peter Taylor, who pioneered this kind of work at the University of Venda, looking at how bats are helping macadamia farmers. So then he offered me a PhD here at the University of the Free State, and there's a lot of local apple orchards. So I really wanted to do something applied that's going to help people and see if the bats are helping this agricultural sector at all. The myths have definitely impacted our research in a lot of interesting ways. For me, it's quite interesting how almost all South Africans have the same beliefs when it comes to bats. So most cultures around the world obviously have a lot of negative stereotypes when it comes to bats, and it makes sense. All of us are scared. We're not familiar with things that fly and do things at night. But a lot of these negative stereotypes come from myths and more misconceptions. So our social aspect of our work has been so enlightening because we've been going to communities, we've been doing social surveys to understand what South Africans believe about bats. What are the differences? What are the similarities? Mostly similarities between everyone, so that we can better understand these myths and then also share our environmental education programs that we do in schools and on the farms and in the Eastern Free State, because South Africans, we know we have amazing natural heritage and biodiversity. So once you start explaining the positives about bats, they're so important for seed dispersal, pollination, and pest suppression. And then people's minds start to change. We don't have any bats that eat rodents in South Africa. There's very few carnivorous bats in Africa. And I'm very lucky that where I work in the Free State, there aren't any fruit bats because it's too cold for them. So luckily, that's not a conflict with the farmers at all. But I mean, in South Africa, we have over 60 different species of bats. We're very spoiled. We're very lucky. And the bats I'm focusing on are the ones that eat insects, moths, beetles. We know from other farming systems they do eat codling moths and bollworm, and these are some of the biggest agricultural pests in our country. But I now need to see, are they eating the same here, or um, they might be eating the livestock pests or the maize pests. So there's been great research in other parts of the world, in other parts of Africa, but we haven't done anything in Free State yet to understand what they're eating. I'm passionate about bats. I love them. They're very neglected, and obviously, it's been fun to try and convince people. But I'm very glad that I co-designed this research with the apple producers in the area. So I sat down with them and I was like, okay, what insect pests do you have? How does your agricultural system work on your farm? Because obviously, a farm is very complex. You have so many things to take into account. And at the end of the day, people need a livelihood. And so far it's been great. Everyone's been so supportive. They all put up bat boxes at their own costs because the bats were already on the farms, but living in people's houses and roofs. And at least with the bat boxes, it was an alternative house for them to use. So I can also get the guano pellets. So I'm busy with lab work to use molecular techniques to see what the bats are eating, what proportion is insect pests, what proportion is livestock pests, things like that. And then the acoustic data so far, so the bat detectors we used, we put on in the middle of the apple orchards, on the edge, at the water sources. We covered the farm, and the bat, there's over 11 different species of bats on these apple farms, which was also really new, exciting information. And the feeding buzzes from the acoustic data show that they are foraging on these apple farms and in between the trees and the orchard. So now the next step is to understand what they're eating. And next year I'll be looking at the economic aspect. So trying to put a dollar value sign so I can explain to all the stakeholders, okay, this is how much you're spending on pesticides. Maybe if we encourage the bats and the biodiversity to help more, we could reduce this reliance on pesticides. So at the end of the day, it's to help. And yes, I'm hoping it is a framework and a model that we can extend throughout Southern Africa, especially for subsistence farmers and smallholder, but even hopefully for the commercial farmers, because at the end of the day, we all want safe and healthy fruit, but we also want to minimize our impact on the environment.